A day of tragedy and drama for Newcastle, with at least 9 people confirmed dead in an earthquake. A full series of reports in this special edition of NBN News. Good evening, I'm John Church.
And good evening from Tracy Reid.
Newcastle is a city in shock tonight following a devastating earthquake that's left at least 9 people dead and injured about 100 others. The quake, registering 5.6 on the Richter scale, hit the city and surrounding suburbs at 10:30 this morning. And tragically, Newcastle became the first Australian city to have a fatal earthquake. This is how NBN News crews covered the horror hours that followed.
Minutes before 10:30 this morning, Thursday the 28th of December, became a day etched in Hunter history. The quake struck without warning, savagely cutting short our everyday activities, including an interview at the Hamilton bus depot just kilometres from the epicentre.
Terrible. Oh.
The concrete paving rolled in 10-centimetre waves, bewildered bus drivers standing in awe for minutes afterwards. The bus depot was relatively undamaged, not so many old brick buildings in the area, especially in Beaumont Street. It was devastated when the quake swept through.
Well, this is Beaumont Street, Hamilton, just minutes after the blast or the explosion or the earthquake, and it looks as though a bomb has hit. Bombs have hit all along here. It's like a war scene. People are standing around just dazed. There has been some loss of life, it appears, and buildings all up and down the street have just collapsed into the roadway.
Shop awnings became death traps. 2 pedestrians were killed, several more injured when the metal and concrete crashed to the footpath. Rescuers worked frantically with the constant possibility of another tremor in mind to release survivors. Although all the buildings shook badly, it was obviously far safer to be inside than out.
Oh, it just came underneath the buildings. Everything just flew off the walls and it just, I don't know.
Did your building collapse?
No, we were really lucky. And I came out here and I noticed all of this.
As the minutes passed, bewildered crowds filled the roadway, shock turning to tears and then relief as their escape dawned on those standing amidst the chaos.
No, everything, all the buildings just shook and things caved in. Staff room caved in, all the fixtures just sort of give way, stock, everything went everywhere.
The ambulance service is sending all available vehicles, perhaps a fixed-wing aircraft as well, to the Hunter region, where there are reports of several injuries. The quake has also been felt in Wollongong.
It was very frightening. The lights all went out and all the terminals came down and we saw things come down out the front. That's why we all rushed out the back.
How was the bank? Was it affected?
There's a few things sort of off the desk and that, but apart from that, I think that structurally there's a few cracks, but apart from that, okay.
Again, I've got 3 minor injuries here. Right.
$103.
I'm not sure what's in the pub. I haven't been inside.
As the situation cleared, ambulances ferried the injured to hospital and off-duty medicos did what they could to alleviate the suffering. The old Kent Hotel was peeled of its outer layer of bricks, the rest of the wall precariously balancing. There was no option but to finish the demolition job, a task accomplished later this afternoon by a crane.
Rosshampton reporting there. Coming up, Tracy will have the latest on the tragedy at the Newcastle Workers Club.
At the Newcastle Workers Club in the city centre this evening, desperate efforts continue to rescue people still trapped under tons of debris. Several hundred people were in the club when the quake hit. At this stage, 7 have been confirmed dead. At least 20 more have been injured. A crude hospital was established at the scene to treat the victims as they were freed. But at this stage, rescue crews have no idea how many more may still be trapped.
Coordinator of the rescue teams at the Newcastle Workers Club, Inspector Ian Cleary, spoke to the media late this afternoon.
There's a 300-ton retaining wall up on the 2nd floor, which is on a 60-degree angle, and it's being held by a false ceiling up on that floor. And if it moves, which is very light, if it moves, it'll crash down onto the floor, which is directly above where the workers are, and that'll probably bring the next floor down and crash down and make it an impossible situation. So we're working very quickly to try and get these, whatever we can do, to get these people out in as short as time as possible. It's a very slow, methodical job, unfortunately, and that's the worst feature. We have to be slow, and yet we want to be quick, because We're getting heat-seeking instruments in here. They'll be here shortly. We'll ask everybody to move away from here and make no noise, and the heat-seeking instruments will try and locate where there are bodies. There's 3 of those going to be here very shortly.
So the 300-tonne slab of concrete is the problem now?
Yes, and there's nothing we can do about it. We can't hold it back, because where we want to hold it back would be on the floor, which we don't want to give. And there's nothing we can do to hold it back. So that is the problem for me.
And the rest of the building, are you worried that that could topple at any stage?
Yes, the whole building is in a very dangerous situation.
Can you give us an update on the number of fatalities here and the number injured?
There are 2 deceased here, 2 confirmed deceased at the moment, and there are 20 injured. But there are still also people still in the building, and we can't say what condition they're in at this stage.
Do you know how many people might still be trapped?
No, not really. I could say 50, but I really don't know.
How severe are the injuries to those 20 people you mentioned?
In various states, some are quite severe.
Do you have any idea at all just how many people may be inside?
We don't. We've taken the numbers of all the cars that have been in there, and we're putting them through our computer and asking their families who was at the club today. And that way we might be able to try and find out who was safe and who's not. The whole of Newcastle has been badly affected by this tremor, and I think as the next few days go past, we'll realise just exactly how bad it was. The junction itself got a bad setback. If you have a look in that area, there's a lot of buildings badly affected by the tremor there also.
Very badly damaged. So I suppose there's a lot of people away on holidays who haven't yet reported damage that may be.
That's very possibly, yes, that could be true. But there'll be a lot of damage coming in over the next few weeks when everybody comes home.
Among the dramatic events of the day comes a truly heroic effort from a local ambulance officer. Paramedic Ken Isles was one of the first ambulance officers on scene at the Newcastle Workers Club and climbed through twisted steel and concrete to the club's auditorium. Before the quake hit, road crews were setting up for a concert tonight. Moments later, they were trapped beneath rubble. Ken heard a faint cry for help and began moving towards the faint plea.
He was in a baby-like crouch position. It was a matter of police rescue and 2 civilians and myself removing a considerable amount of brick and removing him as quickly as we could, because there was still some more debris above that with the potential of coming down on top of us. So it was a matter of moving as quickly as we could, but being aware that there was more debris on the top.
So it was quite a delicate operation?
Very delicate, yes. So the 2 civilians that were there really need to be commended. They were terrific.
How was the man himself?
He has multiple limb fractures, I believe. I don't have X-ray vision. I was pretty concerned at that time that he may have had some more serious injuries, but that seems to have rectified itself.
How long were you up there?
I honestly don't know. I broke my watch earlier in the job. I have no idea how long I was there. It would have been probably 45 minutes, I'd say.
So were you talking? Was he conscious?
He was talking to us the whole time, yes.
What was he saying?
Oh, he was complaining about the pain in his lower limbs and that he couldn't feel one of his lower limbs.
How was his morale? How was his mood?
It seemed to be high until he realised it was close to being released, and then he started to become more and more concerned, naturally enough.
Were there any signs of other people up there?
He is concerned that there may be other people up there. I believe the authorities are up there now with heat-seeking equipment. He was concerned at one stage that there were cleaners in the auditorium.
Did you see any sign of people?
No.
How dangerous are the conditions for rescue personnel?
They're very dangerous. Everything up there is quite unstable.
Just describe the inside of it.
A bloody mess. The complete mezzanine floor of the auditorium has fallen down. There's bricks and debris, and the roof is hanging quite precariously up there.
Amidst the drama and tragedy, there is some good news tonight. A bingo game scheduled for the Newcastle Workers Club auditorium was moved to a smaller venue just moments before the quake hit. As we mentioned, those desperate efforts continue to rescue people still trapped in the Newcastle Workers Club under those tons of debris. And as mentioned, 7 have been confirmed dead at that one site alone. Tracy was at the King Street Club just minutes before the quake hit.
To be one of Newcastle's most imposing structures, the giant Newcastle Workers Club. This morning it was jammed with many of its most loyal patients, there for their regular game of bingo or a quiet morning at the pokies. Then suddenly, at 10:30, disaster struck.
The room just shook. Everybody got thrown onto the floor.
Everything went black?
Yeah, it went black. We were all just told to get out. There was a bomb in there. And all the other auditoriums completely blown to pieces.
The devastation was immediate. In less than a minute, the giant building was converted into a massive pile of rubble. The club's ground floor car park just disappeared, falling into a giant chasm. On top of it, in a giant clutter of broken furniture, poker machines and walls, the auditorium. And underneath all that, dozens of patrons unable to escape in time.
A mess. You know, there was people everywhere. Just had to do what we could, you know. We find each person as we came to them. You know, there was people behind other people as well, so it was just a mess.
It looked like a war zone. Within minutes, sirens filled the air as rescue teams swarmed to the scene. Police, firemen, ambulancemen, doctors, nurses and volunteers joining forces in the biggest rescue operation this city has ever seen. As the first of the injured were brought from the stricken building, a crude hospital was set up on the road in front. Ambulancemen, hospital staff and even bystanders treating the injured. While priority was given to the most seriously injured, others were left to sit in shock and dwell over what had just happened to their lives.
Everything just started shaking and the lights just went out and all I knew I was just crashing down to the ground and this lady behind me, she's all crushed.
You were trapped for a while, weren't you?
I don't know how long for. I had a piece of wood wedged into my leg.
I guess you were quite relieved then when the ambulance folks cut you out. Did they have to cut you out?
All I wanted was somebody to stand near me, that's all.
In the remains of the club, desperate efforts continued to locate the trapped. An hour after the quake hit, the first of the dead, a middle-aged woman, was taken from the scene. One ambulanceman told the tragic tale of another man who died before help could reach him.
There was one elderly gentleman that we were working on that when we first got there, he was fully conscious. We just simply couldn't get his legs out, and unfortunately he bled to death while we were there.
One of the gentlemen in there, I'd like to pay an absolute tribute to him. He was trapped along with the other two ladies. He's been critically injured, and I believe he's died as he's come out of the wreck in there. But whilst we were with him, he was offering encouragement to the other ladies. He was wiping rubble out of their faces, talking to them. Just an incredibly courageous man.
But for rescue teams, there were more concerns than just the human suffering. As the morning wore on, fears grew of an aftershock, and with what was left of the club capable of collapse at any time, Sergeant Alex Whiteley, the police officer coordinating the rescue operation, ordered the entire inner-city block be cleared.
I think what we've got to do now is to make sure people realise that they won't have time to run. This thing will hit, and you won't have time to, you'll only have time to blink your eye. So they've got to move.
What stage have rescue operations reached now?
Well, the situation is that we've got a lot of people out. I've got a list here of all the people that we've got out so far. I'm just counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I got 13 people who've been taken out so far and are in a satisfactory condition. As far as I know, there is one possible dead, but not confirmed at this stage. And there is a lot of other people trapped. We don't know how many.
Well, that quake put a great demand on our hospitals and emergency services. A report in just a moment. Of course, on tonight's bulletin, concentrating on today's earthquake. Emergency services unleashed the New South Wales Natural Disaster Emergency Plan to handle today's tragedy. They described it as the biggest natural disaster since Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin.
The biggest hurdle facing emergency services today was lack of communication after power and telephone lines were cut. An emergency mobile unit powered by a generator was urgently erected to cope with the hundreds of calls needed to coordinate the biggest rescue and emergency crisis this region has ever seen. Denison Street became a mobile hospital with more than 40 extra ambulances from Sydney and the Central Coast giving assistance to hunter medics. Today's quake had no respect for those dedicated to save other people's lives. The ambulance building itself was severely damaged and all operations were forced to be held outside. The state disaster plan is a mammoth operation calling on all the state's emergency services, including police, fire brigades, hospitals, ambulances, state rescue services, mobile communication and casualty and accident teams. But emergency services say they always had the situation under control today. 5 helicopters and scores of ambulance vehicles were on standby, with medics wasting no time to offer vital services at accident scenes.
Like the entire city, the Royal Newcastle Hospital also lost all power. The hospital suffered only minor damage to some of the older wings. Hospital officials evacuated all patients and transferred them to nearby parks and footpaths. Makeshift wards were set up handling various degrees of patients, while the casualty section took in those injured from the city district. Doctors and nursing staff stood by in full surgical gear to treat and move patients on as soon as they were delivered by a fleet of ambulances. The only power being supplied to the hospital was through a rescue squad diesel generator. Without enough power reserves available, it was decided surgery was too unsafe and all emergency cases were diverted directly to the Mater Hospital. With the hospital empty, firefighters were called in to clean up a number of dangerous chemicals that spilled when the quake hit. Hundreds of patients sprawled out on the grass in nothing but hospital gowns, many still plugged into vital dialysis machines and heart monitors. Tarpaulins were then strung out to provide shade as the temperature soared. As power was slowly restored to units, patients were moved back inside by orderlies and nursing staff. Tonight, the North and York wings of Royal Newcastle Hospital remain closed, and patients from those wings have been transferred to Belmont and surrounding hospitals.
Well, owing to the severe structural problems at Royal Newcastle Hospital, the Mater has taken over as the casualty hospital for the city. About 50 patients have been brought here by a fleet of ambulances. We understand, however, that only 2 of those patients are seriously hurt. Although the Mater Hospital suffered small fractures in older wings and power shortages to the casualty section, it became the disaster headquarters for the entire region. Ambulances took some patients to outer hospitals to make room for others coming in, but due to the holiday period, the hospital had an abundance of bed space. Hunter Health Board Chief Executive Owen James confirmed the early injury toll, but said plans were in hand to cope with many more patients if needed.
The majority of them have minor injuries. There are 2 with more serious injuries, such as leg and chest injuries. These patients are being looked after at this hospital. In the event that more patients do come, we have arrangements which will allow them to be sent on to Wallsend. We've already filled up Western Suburbs Hospital and Maitland Hospital. If the worst comes to the worst, we have a capability to relocate people to Sydney hospitals.
A care flight helicopter remained on standby at the hospital to take more seriously hurt patients to Sydney. It's understood 2 wings of the Royal Newcastle Hospital may be beyond repair, but even worse news is that the new $140 million John Hunter Hospital at Rankin Park may also have suffered even more crippling structural damage. The quake twisted the near-complete building along the length of its central corridor. There are fears that the quake may have effectively broken the hospital's back.
We've been here for about 3 hours. As you can see around you, there's extensive cracking to masonry and render. But until such time as we get a structural engineer's inspection, probably tomorrow, it may be many weeks before we'd realise the full extent.
This crack that runs virtually the length of the corridor here, if that's structural, what will that mean for the hospital?
Well, in terms of time, very difficult to say. Certainly we will have to, any damaged brickwork we'll have to remove and rebuild. So it is devastating at this stage.
Certainly difficult to take it all in, Tracy.
Certainly is, John.
Other effects of the quake included a fire and a Tyres Hill Tech and a burn-off at BHP. Now, that's still to come in our news.
BHP Steel closed down its operations soon after the quake, experiencing a major power failure. Despite the alarming sight of flames and smoke raging over the steelworks, a spokesman for the company says the situation is completely under control.
BHP's steel plant was shut down soon after the quake. A spokesman for the company said the plant lost power during the crisis and workers immediately adopted an emergency plan. The plant's 78 coke ovens were vented, releasing volatile gases which would normally circulate throughout the steel processing plant. The effect of the flames and smoke billowing from the steelworks added a nightmarish backdrop to the chaos of the earthquake. Despite the spectacle, a spokesman reported that no one was injured on the site. However, 2 workers were hurt at the nearby brick manufacturing plant at Mayfield. Another fire at Tyres Hill Technical College gave firefighters some anxious moments following reports that there were people trapped in the building, along with dangerous chemicals stored in laboratories. Firefighters using breathing apparatus confirmed that the block was deserted and the blaze was brought under control within about half an hour.
Just hours after the quake, demolishers were already at work cleaning up unsafe structures.
The Newcastle RSL suffered extensive damage when the quake hit. Luckily at the time few people were in the building and no one was hurt. Fearing the remaining walls could fall, rescue workers called in the demolishers to finish off the job. While onlookers were kept at a distance, 2 huge cranes slowly pushed the facade of the club back into the earthquake rubble. A huge cloud of dust showered into King Street, leaving a pile of debris and just a memory of the old club. At Stockton, the bridge was closed for 2 hours while experts examined the crossing for damage. Earlier, a motorist called police after hitting a huge crack at the opening to the bridge. The break had been estimated at 10 centimetres, but tightened later in the day. By 2 o'clock, the road was reopened to traffic. Bill, what sort of damage is there to the bridge?
None to the bridge itself, slight subsidence of the approach embankment on this side.
Was it a good idea to block off the bridge just in case?
One never knows.
Royal Newcastle Hospital has asked that all staff report for normal rostered shifts tomorrow. The blood bank will be open to build up stocks for the weekend. Well, in just a moment, Prime Minister Hawke is in Newcastle tonight. We'll have a report on that. And also an inquiry into yesterday's fatal Tangara derailment.
Most of Sydney felt the Newcastle quake. It rocked homes there and swayed tall buildings, but there's only minor damage. It's one of the rare times the city has been affected by an earth tremor. The biggest was 16 years ago when an early morning quake shook people from their sleep.
Sydney was getting ready for morning tea when the earthquake arrived. 10 seconds of terror with an unmistakable ring of trouble.
Quite a large earth tremor, I would suggest.
Certainly was.
The floor started shaking and it was like being in an ocean on waves.
I lost my balance in bed and my cup fell off the table and that was it. It stopped.
We thought the building was falling down.
We couldn't get out
quick enough. 25 floors up at Bondi Junction, radio man Stuart Cranny was on air, but the skyscraper shuffle wasn't on the playlist.
It was like broadcasting on top of a 25-storey pogo stick. It was mad, very, very scary.
It took out power right across the metro area. While hundreds of thousands of homes and shops temporarily lost supplies, few were damaged, to the amazement of their owners.
It shook bad enough for us to want to go outside in case the building fell down around us.
As the death toll rose, so did the thirst for news, and a special police hotline was soon swollen with callers.
As soon as we get the information, we'll get it back to you.
Radio talkback shows were also overrun. Everyone had a quake story they were anxious to share.
We had a couple of characters. One bloke was on the toilet and he thought the water board were going to send him up to Mars. I think he got a bit of a shock.
At 5.5 on the Richter scale, it was technically a moderate earthquake, well down in the power league from this year's San Francisco tragedy, which at 7.1 killed more than 60 people. While our biggest earthquakes have happened in Western Australia, the most recent at Meckering registering 6.9, the Sydney region has suffered several moderate quakes, usually hitting hardest on the Currajong fault line.
It's not a single fault like the San Andreas fault in San Francisco. It's a group of faults and uplifts which run all the way from the Wollongong district, curve around to the southwest and west of Sydney, and peter out as far as we can see them on the surface, about where this earthquake seems to have been centred.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has arrived in Newcastle to survey the damage, and rescue workers have begun using infrared cameras and listening devices in the wreckage of the Workers' Club to locate survivors.
As mentioned, Prime Minister Bob Hawke is in Newcastle tonight, assessing firsthand the situation resulting from today's earthquake. He looked upset and anxious and brushed past the media, offering no comment, but speaking rather with Salvation Army officers at the scene. The Prime Minister sent this message earlier today. I would like to extend my deepest sympathy to the families and friends of those affected by the earthquake damage to the Workers' Club. The loss of life and the injuries of this appalling event are truly tragic, and the thoughts of all Australians will be with you and with all citizens of Newcastle today. Australia's share market finished slightly weaker after this morning's earthquake shut down BHP's steel plant in Newcastle. Brokers said the share price slid in anticipation that BHP steel production would be disrupted.
Maintenance work has been blamed for yesterday's tragic derailment at Wentworthville, which killed a commuter. The man died several hours after he was freed from the wreckage. The state government today announced an independent inquiry on procedures for track repairs.
Railway workers were quick to suggest the derailment of the Tangara train at Wentworthville yesterday was due to a problem with the tracks. Boxing Day heat was blamed for buckling the rails. Transport Minister Bruce Baird confirmed complaints had been made about the tracks on Tuesday, and maintenance crews had moved in yesterday to rectify the problem.
As if the trains had continued to go over that particular section of track, it would have been a fairly rough ride for a while. Evidence we have at this stage is that the actual maintenance being carried out was the major problem.
City Rail says the work was being carried out by a local maintenance crew 200 metres from the platform where the Tangara finally came to rest.
It would appear that the track actually misaligned under the train, causing the last 3 cars to derail.
Officials say the Tangara involved in the Wentworthville accident was travelling at 95 kilometres an hour. That's 20 kilometres an hour slower than the required speed limit. They say they're now centring their investigations on whether or not that speed limit should have been much lower in the maintenance area.
Now, the decision was made on the spot that the maintenance was not of a major nature and that a speed restriction wasn't required. In retrospect, one would question that decision.
All such decisions are now the subject of both an independent government investigation and a coronial inquiry following the death of the last passenger to be freed from the wreckage, 41-year-old Francis Pepper of Blacktown. Mr. Pepper died in hospital during the night.
A memorial service today in the north coast town of Kempsey for the 35 people killed in Australia's worst road accident. 2 buses collided head-on at the Pacific Highway early on Friday morning, 3 days before Christmas.
It was an emotional reunion for families who'd come from around the country to mourn their loss, among them scores of police and rescuers who'd worked so hard to free the injured. The All Saints Anglican Church quickly filled to capacity in the sweltering heat. Many who'd come to pay their respects were forced to listen outside to the minister's words of comfort and praise.
In fact, the whole of Kempsey as a town in this Macleay Valley has been shaken, as has been the whole of our nation of Australia.
Among the gestures of sympathy, this floral cross, 35 roses, a symbol for each life lost. United in their common grief, politicians and local people alike observed a minute's quiet, a silence broken finally by the steady tolling of the church bell. And for the many injured when the 2 coaches collided, as much as relatives grieving lost loved ones, 1989 has been a Christmas they will never forget.
Still to come, sports news with Mike Ribbett, and it appears that the sporting world hasn't escaped tragedy either.
John, unfortunately, a fatality in the Sydney to Hobart Yacht race. That report in a moment. A veteran sailor has died in the Sydney to Hobart as a yacht mast toppled during a fierce storm. 58-year-old Peter Taylor suffered massive head injuries in the early morning accident on board the Victorian competitor BP Flying Colours.
The damaged yacht limping toward the coast 12 hours after the tragedy. Still on board with the 12 surviving crew, the body of the dead sailor. Earlier, a rescue helicopter crewman was lowered onto the boat, but the rough seas made retrieving the body impossible.
The conditions were very trying due to the large swell and the tossing and pitching of the vessel. Winching from the aircraft was quite a difficult task.
Finally, docking in Eden, the men of BP Flying Colours could not hide their exhaustion and grief.
It is a freak accident, and there's not very much you can do about that sort of thing.
BP Flying Colours was running 27th in the race and was just entering Bass Strait when disaster struck.
As the mast collapsed, Peter Taylor was trapped.
Well, the mast crashed, and I believe debris caused him to have severe head injuries.
Today, Taylor's home club of Sandringham was in mourning for a veteran.
He's been a great sailor, and not only a great sailor, but a very popular sailor as well.
It was the third death in the Sydney to Hobart's 45-year history, but organisers say there's no need to question safety.
It's very sad that this has happened, but I think if you take the amount of people that are at sea and in rough conditions, etc., I think the accident rate has been very, very negligible.
But even with that safety record, which is regarded as the best in the world, there are still enormous risks inherent in ocean racing, risks that race organisers insist cannot be avoided. Indeed, they admit the danger is part of the sport's attraction.
The people rather like to pit their wits against nature, you know. I think this is what it's partly all about. If it was just a nice little summer cruise, I don't think a lot of guys would be really that interested.
Further south, the leading boats were experiencing better conditions, with the winds easing throughout the day. $1 Million Maxi Drumbeat regained the lead early this morning and has drawn 10 nautical miles clear of the field. If she maintains her current speed, it's estimated she could take line honours at around 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. In second place, Sid Fisher's Ragamuffin isn't gaining on Drumbeat as the seas gradually ease from the rough 3 to 5 metres experienced overnight and this morning. In third place, Hammer of Queensland, who led during the night, has dropped back to be 4 miles behind Ragamuffin. Hot on their tails is Heaven Can Wait, who could still challenge the leaders in the run home. Fifth overall is Cyclone, who's currently third on corrected time behind Ultimate Challenge. But that is only provisional, as the earthquake has made contact difficult. To date, 12 yachts have had to withdraw after taking a battering in the gale force conditions down the south coast, including Japanese Maxi Marishiten.
Of the Lake Macquarie yachts in the Classic, Hills Antenna is best placed, being 29th on line honours and 20th on corrected time. Ninja Go is 78th and 65th on corrected time, while St Jude is 103rd and 85th. Well, on a lighter note, punters were shaken but not put off as they climbed aboard Vulcan Warrior in the festive season cup at Gosford today.
They're followed by Power Force. He's badly looking for a run, and so too is Red Ed. They came together on the turn as Vulcan Warrior went for home. Tipax out wide and Swift Beat running on with another impulse there. Vulcan Warrior well clear at the 100 though. Another impulse holding down second from Swift Beat the charge, and now and again is rattling home. But Vulcan Warrior's too good and beat another impulse.
Is Vulcan Warrior $1.60 and $1.10, another impulse $2.60 and Swift Beat $2.50. The extra double at Gosford today for the numbers of 7 and 6 paid $5.70. The daily double for 5 and 3 paid $18.30. And John, that's our look at sport tonight.
Thanks, Mike. The standoff is continuing in Panama, where Manuel Noriega refuses to leave his refuge in the Vatican Embassy. Frustrated by the failure of diplomatic efforts, American soldiers are trying a bizarre technique to force his surrender.
Rock, the latest U.S. ploy in the battle of wits with its #1 target, Manuel Noriega. Music played at full volume from speakers soldiers aimed at the Vatican Embassy. A Panamanian radio station urged crowds to gather outside, and they did. Overnight, U.S. troops shot out streetlights, then lit flares and moved armored vehicles beside the embassy. So far, the Vatican is resisting all pressure. President Bush started his fishing vacation in Texas today, admitting the Vatican's refusal to turn over Noriega to the U.S. complicates things. But he is still insisting his nemesis face American justice, even if holding a trial means secrets spilling out about Noriega's days as a CIA operative.
I think that's history, and I think that main thing is that he should be tried, brought to justice, and we are pursuing that course with no fear of that.
In Panama City, there is a still emerging and very unsettling view of Noriega's lifestyle and power. One of his many luxury homes contained the Australian equivalent of $6 million in cash, turned over today to the new government. He revered fellow dictators, Libya's Gaddafi and Adolf Hitler.
In Romania, the People's Army continues a roundup of Nicolae Ceausescu's hated security forces. The new government says they'll be executed if they don't surrender. Today, there was new evidence of atrocities by the president's loyal troops.
People here are going about their normal lives, even though there's still the threat of sniper fire
from a handful of security police still holding out. Today they were warned to surrender and face prison or be shot by firing squad when captured. And some of the most hated laws of the Ceausescu regime have now been rescinded, including the decree forbidding abortion. But few have had time to celebrate the country's new beginning. In graveyards in the capital, the grieving goes on as those who were killed arrive by the truckload. Bucharest is a harsh place at the best of times, but the atmosphere here at the moment is especially sombre as the city comes out to bury the many thousands killed over the last few days. And it's at graveyards like this one that you begin to understand the scale of the slaughter. This man lost his 23-year-old son in the recent fighting. He was an innocent victim gunned down in the streets by one of Ceausescu's fanatics. With his execution by firing squad, it's only now that the security force are giving up the battle, gradually surrendering and allowing the people to once again venture outside in relative safety.
Now an update on the earthquake situation. 5.5 on the Richter scale, and we understand at this stage 9 people dead. The worst scene today was definitely in King Street at the Newcastle Workers Club. And Leslie Robinson, our reporter, has just returned from that scene with an update on the situation.
Rescue efforts are being hampered by the extremely delicate nature of the operation. The toll here stands at 7 dead, 21 injured, but workers who've been inside fear it may climb higher. For the moment, workers are working at the sides of the building, gingerly removing rubble, desperately trying to reach anyone who may remain trapped inside. It's expected the operation will go on right through the night, with the eyes of the world media closely watching events here.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, of course, there was one good thing about today. The weather was at least fine and didn't hamper rescue efforts. With full details on the weather, here's Nat Jeffrey.
Thanks, John. Good evening. Well, weather conditions will be important for the next few days, and it looks at this stage as though there might be a shower or two near the coast, but let's hope not. We'll take a look and see. So an update chart shows low pressure off the coast of Queensland, also a smaller centre now off the coast of New South Wales, east of Sydney, and that's why the winds are freshened from the south during the day. Also an upper air disturbance moving across the eastern parts of the state, and that accounts for the cloud cover that we've had for most of the day. High pressure moving out of the Great Australian Bight towards the Tasman Sea. The airflow will remain southerly for another day or so, those winds getting back to the north over the weekend. But only briefly, another change already looming in the Great Australian Bight, low pressure trough and cold front. The change itself is likely to weaken as it moves along the New South Wales coastline. There'll be little effect on the Hunter region. That's the way it appears at this stage, and the weekend should be mainly fine. At this stage, we're expecting a few coastal showers, mainly for the northern half of the coastline for the next 24 to 30 hours. Let's hope they can track northward from the Hunter region. The cloud satellite photo shows a massive cloud off the coast of New South Wales, and of course there is low cloud between the coast and ranges. The heavier mass we can see out there in the Tasman Sea associated with low pressure systems in that area. For major centres around Australia tomorrow, 33 and fine for Townsville, a top of 28 expected for Brisbane, 25 and mainly fine in Sydney, 25 and fine for Canberra, 28 in Melbourne, 22 degrees for Hobart, 29 degrees and fine in Adelaide, 27 over in Perth, 33 with late storms for Darwin, and 38 and fine in Alice Springs. In New South Wales today, there were isolated showers on the mid-north coast. The top rainfall registration in the 6 hours till 3 this afternoon was 4 millimetres at Smoky Cape. Temperatures were a little below average for most of the state, in fact as much as 9 degrees in the southern parts, and the top was 31 degrees at Casino and Brewarrina. That was the recording received by the Bureau. We had a report from Gloucester with a top of 32 degrees there this afternoon. Thredbo had the other extreme with a maximum of just 14 degrees. Sydney's top of 23 is 2 degrees below average for this time of the year. To the Hunter region, temperatures overnight fairly close to normal, except for the upper parts of the Hunter once again. Murrurundi there with an overnight minimum of 8 degrees. 18 reported at Maryville and 19 on the coast at Nobbies and Norah Head with 18 degrees at Gosford, 14 degrees for Cessnock and 13 at Dungog. Temperatures during the day very close to average for this time of the year, and Gloucester there of course with a top of 32, 31 for Jerry's Plains, 27 for Merriwar, also Cessnock, 23 on the coast at Nobbies and 24 degrees at Williamtown. No rainfall reported during the day. Outside conditions partly cloudy, and it looks like a few showers starting to move in. Temperature on 20 degrees a short while ago, the wind from the south at 36 kilometres per hour, the relative humidity 73%, and the barometric pressure 1,012.2 hectopascals, and still rising. High tide tomorrow morning at 10 minutes to 10, and the low tide at 4:35 in the afternoon. The sun will rise at 5:45 and set at 4 minutes past 8. The forecast includes a moderate to high fire danger rating, a shower or two expected near the coast overnight, and then mild to warm and humid tomorrow. For coastal waters, a strong wind warning is current, south to southeasterly winds up to 60 kilometres per hour at first, but easing overnight to about 30 kilometres per hour. The outlook, beg your pardon, seas up to 3 metres at first. They'll be abating as those winds ease, and the swells around the 1 metre mark from the southeast. It should be rising up to about 1.5 metres. Now, the outlook, mainly fine weekend expected with southeast to northeast winds. On Saturday, temperatures in the high 20s to low 30s, and on Sunday, a little cooler with the maximum temperatures there mid to high 20s. For tomorrow, 26 degrees, the expected top for Newcastle, the same for Gosford and Sydney, 27 for Taree, and a top of 32 for Scone. About 17 degrees overnight, looks like being mainly fine over the weekend. Over the next 24 hours or so, though, the possibility of a shower or two near the coast. Now, even though we do need some rainfall in the Hunter region, tonight is definitely not the night we can look forward to that. We'll have more news for you in just a moment.
Well, Newcastle is a city in shock tonight following a devastating earthquake that has left at least 9 people dead and injured about 100 others. The quake, registering 5.6 on the Richter scale, hit the city and surrounding suburbs at 10:30 this morning. And tragically, Newcastle became the first Australian city to have a fatal earthquake. Around 10:30 this morning, most of southeast Australia felt a slight tremor, but not so slight in Newcastle. The epicentre of the quake was 5 kilometres west of the city, and the entire Hunter Valley was rocked.
Terrible. Oh.
Most of the city was damaged in some way, but Beaumont Street, Hamilton and the Workers' Club seemed to bear the brunt of the quake. The old brick buildings in Hamilton couldn't weather the shaking, and many walls toppled into the street. 2 pedestrians were killed and several more injured as shop awnings crashed to the pavement. As the minutes passed, the extent of the destruction became obvious. In King Street, Newcastle, the walls of the Workers' Club caved in, trapping perhaps hundreds of patron and staff beneath fallen cars and debris. 9 people have been confirmed dead there, but that toll is likely to go higher as rescue efforts continue into the night.
Hopelessly trapped under bricks, rubble and poker machines. The poker machines were just driven into them and holding all sorts of things.
How bad were some of their injuries?
Tracy, it varies from fractures right through to exsanguination, just profound loss of blood.
In makeshift hospitals on the median strip across from the club before being ferried to the Mater
there's going to be
Hospital
more
by a fleet
rescue.
of ambulances brought in from Sydney. The casualty ward at the Royal Newcastle Hospital also received many of the injured. However, hundreds of in-house patients and staff were evacuated and moved to the nearby park and footpaths as power was restored to the hospital. Tonight, the York and North wings of the building remain closed. Many old and well-known landmarks in the city were also severely damaged by the quake, including the Newcastle RSL, Tighe Hill Technical College, BHP, the old Kent Hotel at Hamilton, and the Stockton Bridge, which has now been reopened.
The RAAF is calling for all off-duty personnel to get in contact with them. They're trying to organise volunteer groups in relation to the quake. There is a number to call, 286767. Well, Newcastle Police have now closed the city centre in Hunter Street from the Dairy Farmers Corner down. Hamilton's Central Business District is also closed. However, many other essential services were back to normal within hours. One of the first services hit by today's tremor was the electricity. Almost all power to the Hunter Valley was cut. However, emergency crews restored electricity suburb by suburb. Most services were restored by 3 this afternoon. But individual homes without power can now ring 560-560 for assistance. That number again, 560-560. The gas company has been monitoring the pressure in the mains and says there's been no pressure drop throughout the day, indicating there have been no gas leaks as a result of the quake. The Hunter Water Board appealed to the public to conserve water so the treatment plants would not back up with untreated effluent. Those plants weren't operating while power was down. The Australian Seismological Centre in Canberra measured the quake at 5.5 on the Richter scale. Scientists say it was probably the result of underground pressure on a shallow geological fault. It's because the fault was so shallow that damage has been so widespread. This earthquake was not the result of continental plates sliding over one another. That was the cause of this year's San Francisco quake. Newcastle does not lie on a major intercontinental fault line. This quake, say scientists, was caused by compression in the Earth's crust breaking up under pressure. The lack of a seismograph in the Newcastle area means the exact location of the epicentre is difficult to calculate, although early reports place the quake centre at just 5 kilometres west of the city. Reports of structural and property damage can be registered with the police or state emergency services. The Disaster Welfare Group has organised emergency accommodation for those people who cannot sleep in their homes tonight. Details are available from the Cardiff office of the Department of Family and Community Services. The number to call there is 546688. That's 546688. The department has also set up an emergency welfare centre at Broadmeadow High School. SES units from around the valley have converged today on the city to assist. Tents have been erected in Cameron Park, Hamilton for elderly people, a scene repeated around the city. But social security offices will be closed tomorrow due to a computer breakdown. The state government has announced relief measures will be available for the victims of today's tremor. Financial assistance and replacement of essential household items to restore homes to a safe condition will be available from the Department of Family and Community Services. Small business loans of $25,000 at 6% will be available for those operations unable to arrange finance through normal commercial channels. Councils will be reimbursed the full cost of emergency repairs and then subsidised for permanent restoration work. Churches and voluntary non-profit organisations will also be eligible for concessional loans for the restoration of essential facilities.
Just devastating, John.
Certainly is. A scene in Hunter Street that we haven't experienced before, Tracy.
Certainly have. 2 o'clock this afternoon. I didn't think I'd ever be able to drive down Hunter Street on a weekday and see it completely deserted. It was like a ghost town.
And the question on everybody's lips will be, where were you when the quake hit on Thursday, the 28th of December? Good night.
Good night.